Hello audience, in this video we're going to start installing new wood on this thing. So here's the old wood I removed from the car. Now, in the last video I was talking about the roof being distorted. What I was referring to was these pieces that run across. It's very common for these to warp over time and they cause the roof to distort. They should have a slight arc to them, and sometimes they bend flat or they arc the other direction. It's a really common problem and it's really easy to fix. These are pretty cheap to buy new. They're also really easy to make, and as long as you're removing the vinyl roof and the headliner, they're really easy to install. I expected to have to replace these. What I did not expect was the rest of this wood to be completely shot. So obviously everything here needs to be replaced. Now there are pre-made kits you can buy for replacement wood for fairly decent prices, but however I'm going to make all this wood myself in-house for a few reasons. One, pre-made anything, especially for antique cars, has a habit of not fitting properly, because it's hard to custom make something for a car that you've never seen. This is a big problem with interior kits, top kits, and I've experienced it with wood kits also to a point. So I try to stay away from pre-made kits as much as possible, especially with the older cars. Another reason is I don't have to wait for shipping, or if it's made to order, I don't have to wait for that. I can get started on this immediately. So that'll help. I'm not going to get too in depth on making the wood on this, or really on any subject with this car, because there's just so much to do on it. But I'm going to go over a few things and assemble it on camera. Now, because I'm making the wood myself, there's one big problem. There's not much here to make patterns from. So some of the wood is still holding its shape good enough to make patterns from, and I'm going to use that plus take measurements from the body on the inside, and with all that I should have enough to put together something that works. Now, when you're taking dimensions from the original wood, one big problem a lot of people have done that I've seen is they just assume the wood is in its right shape. Now, like I've said, this stuff can warp over time. Even the bigger, heavier pieces can, and they can warp in such a way to where it looks like it was made that way. And that can get really confusing. You can end up making wood exactly perfect to the original, and it's not even close to fitting. So you really need to watch out for stuff like that, and pretty much just observe everything to see if it all looks right. Meanwhile, work is being done on the front fenders, so I'll show you what we've discovered and what's already been done. Looking at the left front fender, as we can see up front, it's been beat up a bit and then hammered out. The bead has been cracked open typically and has been welded back together. Looks like a good fix. The bead on the side of it has been cracked in the typical place, but it wasn't too bad and we've already fixed it. It has a tear on the back corner that also has been welded together. Otherwise pretty straight, not much wrong with it. Looking at the right front fender, up front we can see it's pretty straight, which is unusual. The bead is also cracked in the typical location and has been welded back together, but not the wire core, so that'll need to be fixed. It's also been ripped open further back. As you can see, the bead doesn't line up because it was welded back together crooked, so that'll need to be fixed. On this part where the splash apron is welded to the fender, you can see it's cracked open and is loose. This is pretty typical and is easy to fix. Underneath, we can see where it was cracked and welded back together. Looks like quite a mess, but it's fixable. Other than all that, it looks pretty good. I'm not going to show much about restoring these because I've already made a pretty thorough video of restoring Model A front fenders, and this is just more of the same thing. So now we'll begin installing the new wood, starting with this piece. This goes across the back of the body, and you'll see in a minute. This is the new part that I've made, and this is the original, or what's left of it. Now, this was constructed pretty much in the same way of the original. This was made in 4 different strips that were glued together. I've done the same with this. Now, this is considered to be stronger than if you cut this out of one piece because the grains are going different directions. If it starts cracking, it can't crack across the whole thing. But that's only true if the glue holds, and obviously the glue is not held on this. But it is pretty old. One thing I have done different is on the original, the ends that go on here, they were made out of a separate piece and then glued on later, which is pretty obvious why they did that, is because the wood they made this out of only needed to be maybe 2 inches thick to make this. If they did all this in one piece, it would have to be like maybe 5 inches, and they'd chop off and throw away most of it. But I made it with the ends and everything in one piece because I think this is a stronger design. It was easier to make that way also. Now, most people like to varnish new wood when putting it in because it looks really good, but the thing is, this is structural wood. It's not visible at all when it's done. So what's most important is keeping it protected from the atmosphere or from moisture in the air. So I'm going to paint this really good before installing it, which is what I'll do next. I'm brush painting 2 coats of interior-exterior wood primer and finishing off with 1 coat of Rust-Oleum Gloss Black. Now, while we're waiting for the paint to dry, there's this edge here that nails to the wood, and it's all beat up from hammering and prying nails in it. So I'm just going to hammer it smooth a little. Next, I'm spraying a little self-etching primer on the bare metal surfaces that contact the wood. This will prevent rust in the future. So we're going to attach this for good. Now, originally it had screws that went in from the top because the sheet metal wasn't on the body when the wood was being assembled. However, we're assembling it from the inside with the body already assembled, so we have to think of different ways to attach things. Now, this is a bracket I made out of, I think, 1/8 inch steel, and it's just going to screw on like that right there. And it's a little more elaborate and a little more expensive than the way it was done originally, but it'll be at least as strong as it was before. So, looking at it installed, I can see why people like to varnish new wood, because the way it is now, after all the work and expense, you really can't tell if it's new. I mean, it could be the old wood that's just been glued together and filled with putty. You really can't tell the difference. But like I said, once it's done with the roof on and the headliner on, there's no way you're going to see any of this. So after that, you're only left with its structural value. So that's what matters most. Okay, I've made the rest of the framing for the roof, and it's installed right now temporarily just to see if it all fits properly, and it looks like it does. I may need to shim or adjust the wood a little bit here and there just to fine-tune it to get everything just right. So we'll wait and see what happens when it's time to nail it in for good. Okay, it's a few days later, actually probably more like a week, and I have since prepped and painted all this wood in the same way I did this piece back here, and I'm currently installing it permanently. These bolts along the side here, they were originally carriage bolts that I pointed out before, and I have replaced them with hex head bolts so they can be tightened from the outside. I have also, you can't see it from here, but I have new hex head nuts on the inside so they can be tightened easier from the inside if needed. Alright, we're nailing the sheet metal to the wood. I like to point out that I've got this thin strip of vinyl between the metal and the wood, because this will deter squeaking, which can be a problem on these, and originally it had something like that. So these nails that I'm using, they're pretty much a duplicate of the originals, and once you nail these in, they do not come out, which is important because on these cars, because of the harmonic vibration and stuff like that, nails and screws, they like to rattle loose. They have a habit of doing that. Now, because you can't remove these, it's really important to get it right the first time. So I'm just taking my time to make sure everything looks like it's aligned right, and then measuring stuff and securing it with clamps first to see if it looks right. So here we go. Also holding the wood from underneath to keep the stress off of it while I'm hammering it. Okay, finished nailing the sheet metal down. Now I want to point out that even though I had all the sheet metal clamped down before and it looked okay, still every so often I hammer in a few nails. I would roll this whole car outside and just stand back and look at it and just look at the silhouette of the roof line and compare it with photographs of original cars. Another thing I've been doing while nailing this down is I'll take a straight edge, like this piece of scrap wood, and just set it across the top of the roof and then stand back and compare this line with the line on the top of the windshield to make sure the roof is coming out evenly. Now, this is not a very precision way to measure this, obviously, but the thing is, if you rely entirely on dimensions and blueprints and things like that, nothing is perfect, and with something as complicated as a car body, you can end up building in problems and not even knowing it. So this is something to keep into consideration when working on it, because when it's all done, no one's going to know if one piece of wood is a 1/16 of an inch thicker than another, but people will know if the roof progressively leans over to one side as it goes back. I have a few of these and I've laid them out all over, and they're all pretty much even. This is also a big concern with open cars, setting up the top bows, making them even with each other. It can especially be difficult if the body of the car is uneven. Like, I've seen some cars where the windshield is at this level, but the rear body panel is like at that level, and either the body was reassembled wrong, or it's just from age or something like that. And usually what I end up having to do with those cars is I'll set up the top bows so that they progressively lean over as they go to the back to match it, because there's just not really a right way to do it under those circumstances. But this, however, we got everything straight from front to back, so that's good. Now the structural wood is done, the body is solid now, so we can start the prepping and painting for that. The only thing left is the ribs or the bows that go between here, and those I can put in at any time, so I'm not going to worry about them right now. So that's it for this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.